So the third world kind of says to people that live in a position that you and me are living in, that even though I live in the hood in Harlem, I'm still very privileged in terms of what I have. And I make that very obvious in the album itself. I want to show people that no matter how fucked up we think we have it in our hood, somebody in another hood is suffering 10 times worse. Somebody in a hood in Pakistan, somebody in a hood in India, somebody in a hood in South Africa, somebody in Brazil knows a poverty that is in another dimension than to what we know. And what goes on in those countries directly impacts what we have here, whether we like to believe it or not. Because sometimes we like to forget and turn our back to it as if we're not part of that struggle, as if that's not part of the world. We think because we live in the empire that shit doesn't affect us. You know, the Romans thought like that once about the Goths and the Vandals, and they got fucked over it. So I suggest that we learn from history lest we become doomed to repeat it again.
What's your take on Chavez? It seems to me like if he could say what he wanted, it would be kind of like what you're saying, similar kind of take.
I think that Hugo Chavez has the political leverage that comes from
having a lot of oil.
Not just the oil, but from the fact that he plays up the fact that he is the bastion of what they call leftist support now. He supports other leftist regimes, and he offsets what goes on in Latin America in terms of the U.S.'s influence. It's very interesting because a lot of revolutions in Latin America were characterized as communist during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when a lot of them were really just democratic. A lot of them were people that wanted a similar social system to what they have in England and France, where the government offers more services. America bitches and moans about socialism all day long, but I mean, look at the police force. Don't you have mail? Isn't that socialist? Oh my God, aren't you paying for that? You know, anyone who lives on a military base, that's as close to a socialist system as you can fucking possibly get. The government's paying for your braces. Think about it.
So NHS, you know, based on socialist concept.
So I think what I'm essentially trying to say is that lots of Latin American revolutions began based on a hunt for democracy. But because the United States and other people found it in their good measure to try and discredit that and take away any credibility that they possibly could, they marginalized them to where the only way they could get support was to go to either Russia or China. You know, but it's not like they rejected democracy. It's the equivalent of a woman that walks down the street and some guy tries to talk to her and she's not feeling him. That doesn't mean she's a lesbian. She's just not feeling you, motherfucker. She just doesn't want to be with you. America, we didn't want to be with you. You know, your deal was fucked up. The paperwork was all wrong. So, I mean, I think that Hugo Chavez taps into that spirit of people that feel they've been disenfranchised. I mean, I don't agree with every single thing that he does. I went down to Latin America. I've been to Venezuela myself. I performed at a concert for like 40,000 people, and I was the U.S. representative, so there was a lot of pressure there on me. I do rhymes in Spanish. I did some of that on the Third World, rhyme completely songs in Spanish, and they loved it. And it was completely offset, but it was interesting to note that I went right after China, and then after me, the delegation from North Korea came on and a song praising Kim Jong-il, which was just crazy. I was like, what the fuck? Goose-stepping and all that extra shit. And I mean, I think that he's a great figure for people that want to speak their mind. Like, he's a poster child for the First Amendment in America, but I think in terms of playing out how his policies are going to echo throughout time is really a question of what he can create as an institution in Latin America, because democracy is not about exercising your right to vote 25 times every century. It's about the institutions that people vote for that can be set up to protect civil rights, that can offer people services, because it's supposed to be a legal right for people to get an education, but it's also be a legal right for people not to have to face starvation and to have health care and to not die of preventable diseases.
And that's what I think he's doing. He's implementing he's giving respect back to the people in...
Not going to become powder cocaine, but you know, coca has been used for years for other reasons. And now there were laws coming in from America saying, no, we don't want you to grow. And then, you know, another example of the way that the drug trade is, I would say, completely controlled. And maybe this is really your part of the question, because a lot of people have this issue with what I rhyme about and be like, is that just conspiracy theory? But in terms of illegal substances, before the immediately after the invasion of Afghanistan, the primary military counterpart for America was the Northern Alliance. And after the Taliban is overthrown, they inherit not only the drug trade for the northern part of Afghanistan, but now for that entire Central Asian region. And they're not checked. They're not brought to some military tribunals court. They're given a free license to operate. So I think that illegal drugs are often mixed in with these political marriages that exist in places where people need quote-unquote stability. It's like individuals that, you know, trade love for not being lonely in life. And they're just with somebody that they don't really want to be with, but they have no other fucking choice. And that's the issue with first world countries. They need somebody there. You know, they need a Saddam Hussein there. Somebody that earns for them.
Up at the back.
A lot of questions have been asked, sort of like about challenges that you faced and also the things that frustrated you. Looking forward, what inspires you to go on forward, and rather than what makes you angry, what is it that makes you happy and keeps you going forward in what you do?
I mean, I'd have to say my family, my friends, those are things that inspire me. I think love inspires me, you know? I think at the risk of sounding ridiculous, as Che Guevara once said, that revolutionaries motivated by feelings of love. I mean, that's a great quote because it's actually true. I think that in terms of every problem that I've faced, I'm fortunate enough to have people around me that are not going to sugarcoat the truth. You know, sometimes people are just crazy and just wild out like we're doing shit because that motherfucker's on our college dorm wall. You know, I think that we need to understand the sacrifices that are made for revolution, sisters. And to answer your point incredibly thoroughly, I'd say that if we're talking about a violent revolution, that means something very different for people around the world than it does for us, because revolution in itself implies violence to them. If you tell somebody in Colombia or El Salvador, for example, that we're going to have a revolution, they don't think, oh, that's great, that's wonderful. No, they think, I'm going to move my daughter and my wife out of this country immediately before they become victims of a gang rape by soldiers and before my crops are burned. You know, revolution in places like West Africa mean that there's going to be starvation. It means that people are going to blow up power plants. It means that there are going to be underhand deals made with weapons companies from either Israel or America or some European countries so that someone can have the upper hand on what type of artillery they're going to fire at people. So I think that before we talk about revolution being possible, we have to talk about exactly what type of revolution is possible. And I think that's the basis of your question. So I think that before we engage in the idea about a violent revolution, we have to engage in the idea about an economic revolution, a cultural revolution, one that we control the local politics before we dream about controlling every other aspect of everything around us. Before we say, hey, we're taking this country over, let's say, can we empower ourselves to efficiently run a district or a town? Can we empower ourselves as a people to change our minds about the way that society is run? And I would say this extra, that if it does boil down to a physical revolution, that we have to understand what's risked there. Because in every single revolution that's ever come through the course of time, even for the most justified reasons, or for the most selfish reasons, whether it was a Chinese revolution or a Cuban revolution, whether it was a Haitian revolution or it was a French revolution, I think that you have to know that innocent people have been murdered, innocent women have been raped, people's property has been confiscated illegally and never returned. People have had their culture and their struggles marginalized. And it's interesting to note that in a revolution, People know that and they understand it. They understand the risks that they're facing, even in some small way, but they're willing to take that risk. They're willing to put up everything on the line, to risk their lives completely, just so they can gamble it in the main hopes that it will bring a different life to their people. And it's for many reasons.